This conference will now be recorded.
I call this special meeting to order. If you would stand with me for invocation and pledge, I'm going to ask Commissioner Moore to lead us in prayer. Let's pray.
Thank you for all the blessings you have bestowed upon us. Father, we ask your blessings upon this gathering, and we ask your blessings for all the families that are represented here today. We pray, Father, that the things that we do and say be acceptable. Father, we ask our sins. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call this meeting to order. All 5 commissioners are present, as well as county manager, county attorney, and county clerk, and the committee, Ms. Bassford as well. And this is a special meeting for the CARES Act explanation, and Mr. Dan Shepard is going to be presenting. So Dan, if you would come forward, please.
How's everyone doing this morning?
Good.
So I'm just going to go over, we've got a brief presentation as far as this PowerPoint, and then more or less I'm going to be here to answer any questions that any of you gentlemen may have and try to explain what's further. Just a quick caveat, what we've done over last week is meet with all the potential stakeholders and have them present anything that may or may not be eligible for CARES Act funding. We put those all in a line item, and those are in the packets that you all have in front of you. Now, this is the first draft of the budget as far as you guys are seeing. Now, we have included the line items at Ms. Pickles' request, so that way you can see where these expenditures come per stakeholder. And there is a detail. I can't explain anything further. Should anyone have any questions? But if there's none, we'll go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint. All right, so this is just our agenda for the meeting. Basically, a quick introduction. Like Mr. Waldrop said, my name is Daniel Shepard. We're all with Thomas Howell Ferguson besides Harold Joyner. We have been on site here in Madison County the past week, meeting with people with the county, trying to help the county spend the money for CARES Act in the most effective way possible. With me is Mr. Randon Holt and Ms. Haley Plants. So we are all here to assist the county in doing that. Again, this is our 2 teams. The 3 of us are from Thomas Howell Ferguson, and then Harold is BCC, one of our partners who specializes in disaster. So through our expertise with professional services and Harold's expertise through disaster, we think we can come up with a really good team to help you with this. This is one of the biggest reasons that it's advantageous for specifically small counties to hire outside help for situations like this. We can help ensure compliance because our job is to ensure anytime you sign the check and end up giving this money out and spending it, it is in accordance with all guidelines, specifically 2 CFR 200 and through the Treasury FAQs with this CARES Act funding. Again, we provided what we thought at least on the onset that they passed the baseline of eligibility requirements, and then we wanted to turn it over to you for line items, and those are in your packets. We're here to provide oversight depending on what kind of programs the county wants to implement regarding this CARES Act funding. We can assist, whether that be, I know all of you have spoken when we met with you individually about both small business assistance and also potentially individual assistance, specifically rent and mortgage help that might not be covered by state grants. So should that be the road we want to go down, we'll have a team and we can put a plan in place, and we'll be with you guys for the long haul. The biggest things to keep in mind, the money must be spent on appropriate expenditures, and it must be spent in all services rendered and products delivered by 12/30, not 12/31 of this year. And one thing I know several stakeholders brought up, but we ended up backing out of the plan when we did some more research, was funds may not be used for loss of revenue or to cover something that you wanted in the budget but didn't get initially. So this is going to be only for items that are tied to coronavirus and were brought upon because of coronavirus, not something that we're using it as just a best case scenario. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, so we have, this is our general numbers. Again, like I said, these top ones, you know that you got $810,000. The total of that is 3242 should we utilize all 100% of your allotment. Now, 75% of that is yet to be released by DEM. As of my last communication with our team, who's in constant communication with DEM, there still is no plan as to how they're going to release the money specifically for financially constrained counties. We are continually working on that because we understand that, you know, Madison County isn't going to, they just don't have $2.4 million to throw up and hope that we get paid back on that. So we are in constant communication, and as soon as we find out what the DEM's plan for the release of those funds are, we will let the county know. Also, we will look at creative solutions that maybe we can get special projects, some of our bigger ticket items, approved as a separate project, and the funding released maybe just for that, maybe not on the 25%, but these are all different plans that we will come to as the situation arises. Now, these are our baseline funding allocations, and again, like I said, these are line items. One update we did have this morning, the small business assistance, as of right now, that is everything that is left not line itemed out. However, Lee gave me an updated estimate for the shelter costs, and that cost dropped by $258,000. So that small business assistance pot, again, that is the unexpended funds at the moment, or not unexpended, but unassigned funds at the moment, has increased by $258,000 for a total of roughly $334,000. Your incurred expenses right now, not including our fees, are about $767,000. Now, this is things that have been already paid for. This is, we had some conversations with both Ms. Sherilyn and with County Emergency Management. We think it is most advantageous for the county, given current guidelines regarding PA funding, to run the county's claim that could be covered by PA through the CARES Act, because it will be more immediate reimbursement. Additionally, there are certain things with the new guidance where initially personal protective equipment and some other equipment costs regarding running equipment that might have been necessary for the COVID response are no longer going to be covered by the public assistance portion of the COVID-19 disaster. So therefore, we advise that it would probably be best to run that through CARES Act to ensure reimbursement and that nothing gets line itemed out by DEM. Your projected expenses are, again, that is going to reduce because our the $383,000 was in there, and and then I know Mr. Waldrop would like me to explain very quickly our fees, the $264,000 from our original contract, are included in the incurred expenses. So your actual incurred expenses are a little over $1 million at the moment. And then at the request of the county attorney, we also included a 5% buffer should, when we start talking about the small business or individual assistance, we go over our original project budget to continue to assist the county because we don't want to leave you high and dry. We have that as a reserve should the contract need an amendment and an increase. Now, this is kind of just laying out where the funds are going in broad general categories. The economic support, again, that number is going to jump up to about $300,000 some odd. The expenses to facilitate compliance, these are things to make sure your constitutional offices, your different stakeholders are able to provide COVID compliance, that is social distancing, keeping a barrier between the plexiglass shields, this is PPE. You're not incurring any medical expenses. We met with the County Department of Health. They had pretty much all their budget covered through separate grant funding, so we didn't need to worry about them. Your payroll expenses, you can see that is a big portion of it, and that number jumped up again when we decided to run all of the emergency overtime that different county departments utilize to respond to COVID. Instead of running them through PA funding, we routed them through CARES Act. And then again, some projected costs. The CARES Act does allow for us to continue to cover the non-budgeted workforce costs through the end of the year. Public health measures, most of that is PPE and some other sanitizing equipment. And then projected, again, that is just improvements to public health within the county. And then reasonably necessary, this is going to be our biggest catch-all category. What we will work on for anything that doesn't fall within the actual outlined categories from the Treasury Department can be deemed reasonably necessary, and we have to provide a justification memo. We will work with both Ms. Pickles and the individual stakeholder for each of those line items and work to create a draft memo that we will include in our reimbursement package whenever we backup documentation for the expenses that essentially explains why this was reasonably necessary and how we tied it back to COVID. Does anyone have any questions so far? And then this is just a rough of our timeline. As you can see, we're covering you guys all the way through 12/30, and then also we're not going to leave you high and dry once 12/30 is done. We are planning to see this through to closeout, so the county is a one-stop shop. That's what we want to provide. We're here to help. We're here to provide our expertise and our knowledge. So we're not going to just help you spend it and then leave you with the receipts and figure out how to deal with it. We're going to ensure that when we leave here, it's a complete package, and the county has what my bosses like to call the box method. We're going to put everything in a box, nice, neat package, so that way if you were to get audited down the road, you hand them a box, and that's all. We've got everything. We're above board. We're in compliance, and we have all of our receipts accounted for. And then there's our contact information. We are accessible to any of the stakeholders and any of the commissioners at any time. These are our cell phone numbers. We also have our office numbers available on our email, and we can get that contact information. However is best for you all to contact us. We are here to help. Any questions you may have, any ideas you may have to implement into the plan or into a second phase of funding, we're here for that. So that is all we had. I don't want to take up too much of your time with just droning on. So I guess more or less I'm here for any questions that the commissioners may have.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Quick question. So in the case that we are audited,
yes,
the box is delivered and they have a finding or potential finding, how is that vetted out?
So that would, I would assume, be dealt with, or not assume, that would be a, from us, we would ensure that we help you with that and explain whatever situation the auditors may have found, and ensure that our name is stamped on that work, so we're responsible for that work, and ensure that it's not something that the county ends up being responsible for. In the sense that we're going to do everything we can to explain it, not in the sense that we're responsible.
Here. Yes, sir.
The question I have is, have y'all, I'm sure, probably have developed some type of application?
So for the small business assistance?
Yes.
Yes. So what we had thought about, Ms. Sherilyn, was it the 16th or the 17th of, yeah. Either the 16th or the 17th, she had your calendar. We wanted to call another commission meeting and come up with and present to you all an application process for the small business assistance. But we wanted to tackle that in phase 2 because all of our expenses in the 25%, or all of the 25% was already accounted for. So we wanted to make sure that we got on top of that first, so that way that we can show that these expenses have been incurred, have been paid for, services rendered. We can have a better argument to DEM, say, look, at Madison County has spent their 25% that you allocated. Their total allowance is $3.2 million. Let's get this ball rolling. Let's release some more of these funds so they can continue to do the work.
And it looks like we're gonna be operating on a real tight time frame.
Yes, sir.
And I guess we're gonna need to advertise some kind of a way.
Yes, sir. We had spoken about some of the ideas for the small business, or for small business assistance and potentially individual assistance with, rent assistance and mortgage assistance not covered by state grants. We had talked about advertising on the county website. We had talked about advertising within the newspaper. And obviously, if any of your constituents have brought a way that's better to communicate with them, or, through communication with your constituents, you have a better method of communicating with them, we're all ears, because the best bet is getting these opportunities out to everyone in the county.
We had also talked about working with the chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Speak to say, they would have a way of mailing or contacting businesses.
One possible solution as well that I know we've done in other counties is provide our on-site team here, have us come in for a couple of days and do a seminar, and then meet with individual residents to go over their situation and kind of explain them through the process, because I know this is going to be a very foreign process. I mean, it's an all-new process as is with CARES Act funding, but just, a lot of people might not want to put themselves out there, or they might be confused, and we don't want anyone to not gain assistance because they were confused or nervous about the process. So we would be there to have conversations, meet with them in person in a very low-pressure meeting, and just kind of give them advice on, here's how we can help, here's what you need to maintain eligibility for this funding, and, go this route, go that route, however is best for their personal situation. And that will be another thing that the committee will need, or the commission will need to decide, is what the eligibility requirements are, because that is very open-ended. Basically, as long as we can show that it was somewhat tied to COVID, but in the state of Florida, we had a mandatory closure for all non-essential businesses for like 40 days or something like that. So therefore, almost every small business is going to be able to show that they were affected by COVID. So that really unties the commission's hands to set your own guidelines for what you think would be most impactful for the county for eligibility requirements.
And for the small business assistance, that goes all the way back to losses they incurred from the beginning, March.
Yes, sir.
Up to
3/1 to 12/30 is the covered period. That is the same for the county and for the small business assistance.
We had talked about in the committee meetings a little bit of the parameters of trying to set some kind of a size for local small business. It had to be a brick and mortar. It could have one employee, but not over a certain amount of employees. That, so it would target small business, the local small business person, not a corporate or something. That we had discussed that a little better in the committee meeting earlier. So that would be something that the board would need to give us some consideration.
One way we have utilized to identify potential small businesses that could benefit in other counties is get a drawdown of everyone who applied for and received PPP funding. And because PPP funding is capped at 500 employees, so that automatically kicks out any of your corporate or even large regional businesses. And that will, more directly focus on the smaller businesses. And then we also cap that in our drawdown at, I believe, $125,000 in PPP funding, which is going to be most of your smaller operations, at most, maybe 100, 150 employees tops, when you're talking that amount of PPP. So that way, the funding is going directly back into the community. Also, we have talked about several different situations, and again, this would be something that we would present to the commission as we start to implement that plan. We've talked about different situations where we have tiered approaches, where if you have X amount of employees, you're eligible for X amount. We have talked about running just direct payments based on just a percentage of your PPP funding. And all these options that, we're kind of talking about now would be outlined specifically in a meeting dedicated to figuring out what's the best way to do small business and or individual assistance within the county.
Any more questions?
I mean, I'm here to kind of answer any questions that anybody might have.
As we look over these line items from the different stakeholders here,
Yes, sir.
is there a vetting process whereas you guys score these as legitimate?
So, yes, we didn't score them as legitimate or illegitimate. Anything we thought was just straight up not legitimate, we did not place on a line item. However, we did advise all of the stakeholders that there are certain riskier asks and less risky asks. And if you have any questions about any of them, I can provide you with what are riskier ones, and, specifically if you want to ask about a line item, I can let you know if that's a riskier option or not. But we could also, should the commissioners provide you with a risk assigning of 1 to 3 for all of the line items, and we can provide that as necessary.
That would be very, very helpful. One that just popped out at me when I pulled it up, and I would have to, have a little more information. I see where the town of Greenville has asked for their county city manager, and I'm just not sure how they could tie that to a COVID expense.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one jumped out at me last night, and I was wondering how they were doing that. First of all, they don't have a city manager right now, do they? They have a clerk. Clerk, okay.
And they can, but I just want to make sure.
I was curious about that one.
Yeah, so when we met with the representative from the town of Greenville, we let him know that was, he's the contracted town manager. We let him know the reason that we felt like it was important to include was this change did happen during the period of the impact that coronavirus impacted. However, and we told them that it was a relatively risky option like that. That would be an assigned risk of 3 for us because of the same questions that everyone just brought. What concrete evidence do we have that the town of Greenville would not have been able to make it through coronavirus had they not contracted this? The argument that was presented to us was the gentleman who is the contracted town manager is a CPA by profession. So he went in there to ensure that the book stayed solvent and that the town was able to make it through the coronavirus process without folding completely as far as financially. So that was his explanation for including it on there. And again, as I told you, Mr. Walter, but I'll tell all the commissioners, we asked these stakeholders to give us everything, and anything we thought might be eligible or might be able to provide a justification. We didn't want to be the ones to make decisions. That's not our job. Our job is to present the information. So we can, like you requested, provide risk assessment for all of the line items. However, we don't need, we're not going to be the ones to line item things out if it could potentially be eligible.
I think the risk assessment would be a very helpful tool for the board.
Yes, sir. Anyone else have any additional questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Jerome from the City of Madison, City Manager.
Yes, sir. Jerome, you have the floor, sir.
Yes, sir. Is it possible that the city may get a copy of the draft package?
Yes, sir. That's no problem with that.
Okay, and when you get ready to advertise for the small businesses, that would have an interest, or if we can get a copy of the same communication, we can also put it on our city's Facebook as well as our website. We have all the customers that are access utilities, so that might, be greater assistance in trying to reach all of them.
That would be very helpful, Mr. White, very helpful.
Okay, other than that, I want to thank the representatives. We did have staff meet with them. They were very helpful too, so, we are encouraged. So, thank you very much.
Good, thank you very much, Jerome.
Let him know on the way.
It's, Sherlyn just said it's on the way. She will be forwarding it to you as we speak.
Oh, okay, super, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any more questions or
Bring things on there, I have questions.
or comments? Sherlyn, do you have anything? Tommy, do you have anything to bring?
No, I think, are we actually gonna go through the list here, or what do y'all wanna, how do y'all want?
Well, I was just noticing like 2 generators were on here, I didn't know.
Cause I think
What
the,
the risk.
I think what we're trying to get out of this meeting is to approve a plan. And so you've got listed here, and I think, in my way of thinking, the most useful way to see everything are these sheets that break it down into past expenditures and future costs. Thereafter, you've got a series of these sheets that are everything.
Okay.
And when you start, the first one, I think, is ability first.
Well, I know,
Sure.
Is that in this detail handout?
The one we got left.
So the detailed expenditure plan and the detailed handout are gonna have the same line items. One is broken up where they're completely separate, so you'll only see the incurred or only the non-incurred costs. And then the detailed expenditure plan, like Mr. Reeves said, has both incurred and non-incurred for each stakeholder on, the same sheet.
Because I think some things, like if you were not inclined to allow Greenville to put in the, request for the city manager, y'all would need to tell us that right now.
Yeah.
You know, and then that can be stricken from the plan, because I believe this plan has to be, a plan has to be approved and then sent to the Department of Emergency Management, right?
Yes, sir. So like, I had alluded to earlier, I think our best strategy moving forward to encourage DEM to release more of that funding up front, is to show that we have expended all 25%. And in order to show that we have expended all 25%, we need to have the line items out and all the backup documentation put together in a repayment package. Obviously, something that we will take care of on your behalf, and submit that to DEM, and let them know, hey, look at Madison County, they spent everything that you gave them on the first 25%. They're entitled to the rest of this money. They have been assigned this money. So, you know, let's work on a plan to release it and allow them to be most effective with the remaining funding.
That being said, Sherlyn, can you follow through and we'll just go through these each one and kind of give the representatives kind of what the board's thoughts process, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir. I would think, because we need that, you'll need to approve that so they can send it on.
Okay.
And I believe also the outcome of today's meeting, if you approve it, would be, you'd be authorizing the clerk to disperse funds of the 800 and some odd thousand that we presently got. So, and I think the kind of the import here, like on that ability first one, you've got the top one, that is previously incurred, and the bottom one that is the future, has not been previously incurred. When you approve a previously incurred, line item, you're authorizing the clerk to disperse that money, so that's what you want to, think about.
Going to give us just a second.
It was in like that,
Yeah.
but it's, all right, it's right behind.
I see ability first, but I only see incurred, I don't see.
Oh, well, I see.
Right in the middle of.
Right.
It's about 20 pages in.
This section.
So, there's two separate sets of packets. One has both incurred and non-incurred on the same sheet for each stakeholder, and one has only incurred or only non-incurred. depending on how the commission wanted to look at it. The commissioner handouts is where it's completely separated, so you're only seeing incurred or non-incurred for each
The
stakeholder.
one that we got this morning.
Right,
Yeah.
under here, that would be the incurred, that is the.
So you'll see a table that has all the stakeholders under that one,
Yeah,
and then you'll see the individual line items.
right.
It's about 20 pages into that.
And while we're finding that, I'm just gonna ask you a quick question. These,
I had it right there.
occurred expenses,
Go ahead.
go ahead, no, go ahead.
Go ahead, you're right, I thought you were-
No, I was waiting until the board found it, go ahead.
We're actually in the surplus of
I didn't know if they
We're
need
not
to
a
be picky, I didn't know
We're
if they need to
over
be
the-
picky in the incurred.
We're over, the first weekend.
So they do need to be kind of picky in what they approve for me to spend right now.
Correct.
If they're wanting to make a county whole or somebody whole or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're asking the
I
same
think
question.
we're asking the same
We're good,
question.
good, I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, go ahead.
And I'll just make sure that we're on the same page. These, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but these incurred expenses that is on the top line, as far as your firm's opinion, these would be legitimate.
So,
We don't wanna spend these funds and then come back and we're.
yes, sir. So again, for instance, the first 4 months of Greenville is an
Okay.
incurred expense,
Uh-huh.
because it is already bought and paid for. However, again, that's free to be stricken should the commissioners decide it so. But yes, everything on there isn't necessarily, it's plausible. So it beat our initial test of making it to a risk assessment and to presentation to you all. So it wasn't just strictly disallowable, like just out of the woods. But it is possible that it would be something that would be stricken later on. It's not necessarily that it must be covered by this.
Then, but if we allow the clerk to disperse these funds, then once we've dispersed the funds, then we're.
Again, yes, sir.
That's my concern.
Yes, sir. And
we're going to have a sub-grant agreement with these folks that says that they're responsible and they agree to pay the money back. One of the things, and frankly, that the board needs to think about, you've got some folks on here that could get this money that may not be able to pay it back. And so, if you have a contract that says they have to pay it back, that's great. If they don't have the money to pay you back at that time, though, you're still gonna be liable. So, you do need to think about that, and I don't know that there's a good way to do this, other than y'all looking at sheet 1, ability first, look at it. Sheet 2, ARC, the expenses. I think that's the only way you're gonna be able to do it.
That's my concern, because if we go through it and disperse these funds, and then they don't have the ability, or it's turned down, then we're just on the limb.
There's not a risk-free way to do this. You've got $3.2 million, and the risk-free way to do it is to not to disperse the money. And so if you're gonna do the good of giving out the $3.2 million, there's just simply gonna be some risk. And I don't know a good way to do it. It'd be nice if they would approve these things before we disperse the money, so you know it would be okay. But it's the federal government's money, and that's not the way they've set up the rules of this game.
Well, that's the reason I know we need to move, but I was looking at the risk assessment, but go ahead,
If I can make a suggestion.
Sure.
If you start with Madison County, that way you make your guys whole and then start with the other people. So we don't disperse $810,000 and get to Madison County and we don't have the money that I have on hand to make us whole. You know what I mean?
Makes
That's just
sense.
my suggestion.
Makes sense.
We need a motion each page or each line item and decide we're approving
I
or
wouldn't
not.
wanna make a motion and a second on every line.
Well, no, I don't wanna do that either. I'm
I
saying,
I think by consensus, you can direct them, which ones, if
Yeah.
there's one you want to strike,
Okay.
you can direct them to strike it, and then at the end, you would approve everything at one time.
Mr. Chairman, well, I think, clerk's got a good point, maybe we we need to go ahead and do Madison County first, and then move down the line from there.
I have no problem with that.
And as far as the risk assessment, what we could potentially do is we can go over here with all the line items in the incurred and go over risk based on it now, let you decide, and then provide that detailed list, for all the remaining expenses to the commissioner at a later date.
I think that would give us a
Yeah,
very
that way we can
valuable
get
tool.
ahead of it now. So as of right now, as Mr. Washington pointed out, we are at, so you have 810,604 was dispersed to the county. As of right now, our total allocation of incurred costs is $31,849.54. So we are in an overage at the current moment of about $221,000. Now, remember, this is including our fees, and it is also including the stuff we moved from PA grants over to CARES Act. But, yeah, if we want to go over, so we want to go over Madison County
Yeah, we
first?
want to start with,
Yes,
we'll start with Madison County first, and because
Wait a minute, before we get going. Y'all are billing by the hour though, so when we talk about incurred, it's what we're gonna disperse immediately out of the 810. We're not gonna disperse the 200 and something that's y'all's budget out of the 810.
Correct.
So that's not really incurred in the sense that
Correct.
it's gonna be dispersed.
Correct. Well, so we wanted to put it on the incurred so that way we knew that the county was going to ultimately be responsible for that funding, or for that payment, in the total contract amount.
So the idea is with those fees to reserve the 210 and not disperse, we're not gonna, I mean, y'all are gonna bill us on an hourly basis, we pay those bills. You're saying reserve 200 and something out of that original 810 for that money.
Correct. Yeah, we just, because our services are currently being rendered, we wanted to include that and make sure that it was.
Not a problem with that,
Yeah.
but that's a little different than what we had talked about, because the incurred, if that's part of the incurred expenses, that's not being authorized for immediate dispersal.
Mhm.
Those have to be dispersed upon receiving the invoices for the
Yes,
hourly
sir.
bills.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, so then you're looking more, not, our fees notwithstanding, you're looking more right at around the 810, actually a little bit under.
Okay, well, let's go. I guess the first page, if I'm looking at it right, would start out with, clerk of the courts. Is that the first page of Madison County?
Yeah, I can't see that.
You got your Cadillac to fit now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, as far as their incurred expense, this is relatively low risk. They bought protective shields, thermometers, disinfectant. Did you end up ordering the auto temperature check?
I have not yet.
Okay, so we'll leave that at the non-previously incurred. So, yeah, I mean, we're looking $15,000. Again, this is, it's hardly anything, and this is part of, funding all the way through COVID. Lee provided us with the backup for all this, and we've got everything. I mean, this is, on a 1 to 3 risk assessment, this is a 1.
I guess the best way we discuss each page, if you give us the one, we don't need to make a decision on each page. I guess we'll just put it to the side and then we'll do all of them at one time.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I know you're starting your process, or how would the city, have access to the same, process?
It will go through the same process. We're just, having to start, and I'm assuming that the municipalities would probably fall in pretty close to second after we get through with Madison County.
Okay, do you need a member of city staff there?
Not necessarily. You're welcome to come over if you wish, but not necessarily.
Okay, sure, thanks.
Yes, sir. Okay. Moving to the next page, this looks like the, county commissioners, Madison County commissioners. Cleaning, remote work technology and management costs.
And the management costs, as Mr. Reeves pointed out, we put that on there to, remind the county that that's our agreed upon contract. That doesn't mean that, Mr. Washington needs to cut a check for $264 right now. That will be handled, that was handled when the contract was signed, and your payment structures, that's above my pay grade. But we just wanted to put it on there to ensure that the board knew that that was the cost. So that way there was no confusion about the funding.
Okay.
And then, Ms. Pickles, I know we have looked at the estimates for the laptops and then the upgrade to this room. Have those been purchased yet or no?
No.
Okay. All right, so we'll leave those on previous.
And your rating on that would also be a 1-to-1?
As far as the $5,000, yes.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
one thing. Look, I want to make sure the board understands, you're looking at previously incurred and to be incurred in the future. Once we pass a page, y'all are saying, yes, that's okay. Both of those are okay, and unless you say it differently, so we don't have to come back. What I'm concerned about is you got a lot of pages here. We don't want to get lost.
Just confused, well, that's,
I think what you've done is the first one that's got clerk of the court, you checked off on that. The next one that's got the Madison County, that starts with the county commissioners, the cleaning office supplies, all that kind of stuff. We're checking off that page, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
And we're moving on to the next one.
now, just to be sure, we're approving the incurred expenses only, or are we looking at the?
That's what I'm trying to clarify. I think what you're doing is approving both. Now, what you're doing, the incurred, you're approving to be paid right now out of our monies, except for their fees. The others, you're approving to be asked for from DEM.
That's-
Part of the 75% that hadn't been.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're all on the same page. Okay,
So we're
And
on
then-
page 2, we're saying yes.
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 So, just we're approving the top line would be for the clerk to disperse those funds.
Right.
And the second set would be to apply for them for the second wave or second pot of money. Okay, moving to the next one, it would be emergency management.
Correct. Again, Lee provided all the details as far as the already incurred costs. I would rate that a 1 as well. That was funding that was originally going to be brought through.
I can get a big print.
You gotta have a secretary who knows how to do it. That's all I can tell you.
I'm sorry, Dan.
No, you're all right. So again, that's, very relatively straightforward. That's fine. I rate that again at a 1. Their future costs, depending on, the only one that I might rate as a 2, would be the generator for the overflow. Our just very baseline estimates are about $100,000 for the purchase of a generator and for the wiring of the senior center as an EOC overflow. The justification that we're kind of workshopping right now, but we think will wait. And again, I do want to remind commissioners, because this is, first of its kind, is very much open to interpretation, so it will be, some of these incurred expenses will end up being, things that we throw at them, and we have a justification, but it seems as though everything, as long as you can tie back to COVID, it's very open-ended. But that will be, I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to release guidance as they have been, as we continue to move on to these future costs. But the only thing we've thought about is our justification behind it is, Lee said you can safely house about, 6 to 7 within the EOC currently, given the space, if we're maintaining social distance
Right.
during an activation. So that would be the necessity of the senior center to be able to space her entire team. You said you need about 25 people?
20.
Roughly 20 people to effectively respond to a disaster within the EOC, and given the current space requirements of social distancing, that's just not possible. So that would be how we would sell that within our justification memos.
And right now, during activation, we do partner with the senior center to go ahead and use that facility for various, EOC purposes. This would wire it up, and it would be a mobile generator, would not be a fixed generator, that would be on site.
Okay, that was my question. Does this include just the cost of the generator itself or the labor to
It is, it's a rough estimate of the generator and the labor.
On
And
the,
then again, the change down there on that 383, yeah.
And that is down to $125,000.
that was my question.
That's the difference in, you know, because we have to have a separate isolation wing, now for COVID or any symptomatic, shelter residents. We were going to try to utilize the special needs generator that was already on site to power that building for that purpose. However, upon speaking with Will and all, we were not able to do that, but this will allow for us to wire it up. So if we have an event and we need to utilize, we have to utilize our isolation wing, we can bring in a generator that's running it and it's already wired and ready to go.
So that 383 reduced down to
125.
That was just for the portable generator.
It'll be the wiring, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Next sheet is the Madison County EMS. We have the public health measures, it's the 219,000. And the,
So, real quick, I just realized these figures should actually be flipped. The COVID ambulance is incurred.
That's why I thought we'd already issued.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, COVID ambulance, the 260 is incurred, the 219 is not yet incurred. What the 219 is providing the capabilities to respond to COVID and other similar situations, specifically because Madison County does so much patient transport. It provides the current ambulance fleet with the capabilities to respond to COVID in an effective measure.
So the top one is future calls, the
Yeah.
bottom one is.
Correct.
Correct, yeah, look 'em. That was one.
And they're rated one.
Yeah, that's, we're seeing, a lot of these items are things that we're seeing bought across several counties. So these are things that I'm not super concerned about.
next we're at, fire service.
Again, this is what was initially going to be included in PA, but we chose to move it into CARES Act, to expedite the repayment and to ensure that all of it will be covered. Yes.
So, but that's already heard expense.
Yeah, that's correct.
There's not any additional.
So, what we're still working on the best solution for that, but our initial thoughts are, because COVID has, or the CARES Act has the language and the verbiage within the act itself stating that it can't be within the budget. We're thinking of moving on from October 1, when the new budget's approved, all overtime for something like this. We will try to capture within PA. So that way, A, not to utilize too much of the CARES Act funding, and B, to ensure that those overtime costs would be allowable, because at the start of a new fiscal year, obviously, you're going to have more overtime budget. So that way, you're not just burning up all your overtime budget and then trying to reimburse yourself through CARES Act. We think it's actually better to run it through PA from October 1 on. Also, that doesn't have the cap date of 12/30. So they can, they haven't put an end date on COVID within the public assistance funding yet.
So for that, we'll use PA funds for the.
No, the $67,000 is going to come. I'm talking about future costs that
That's
we
all
don't.
I'm
Oh,
yes,
sir.
Future costs will be from PA.
Yes, sir, at the current moment.
Okay, the next page is, the annex, Madison County, the annex,
Yes, your door guard.
Yes, and this is, you can't use funds that were budgeted for a salary, but the nature of the job did change. And that is, what we did is we pulled a solid waste employee to come in and the annex. The reason his job changed is because due to COVID, the inmate crew was taken from waste. And that is normally his full-time job, is to oversee that inmate crew. And so since that crew was full, he was reassigned. And since he was reassigned and the nature of his job changed, his salary would be eligible to be covered under CARES.
Because otherwise it'd be coming out of general fund,
Right.
it was being paid out of the
Solid waste.
So those are reasonable.
Both of them are reasonable. And that is to cover his salary through the end of the year for this task.
Moving forward, if anyone has any questions, the next, we're moving to the property appraiser.
Again, those are all documented costs. We're good. We got a packet of that, again, from Lee, and it's directly in response to COVID.
And again, there's nothing here showing about any future costs.
Correct. We did not hear of any future costs that the property appraiser might, incur.
So this cost is just to the end of the year?
So this cost has already been incurred.
Already
She
spending
hasn't
funds.
told us
That's
anything
the,
for
that's
future
the
costs.
computers and the plexiglass, the construction that was done in the office.
Okay.
Would she have an opportunity to present a list of future costs, or is it pretty much done now?
Did y'all ask her about future costs?
She never wanted to meet with us. We never met with her. Same thing with the road department.
I guess, given the nature of her office, maybe the plexiglass and the other things that were incurred are pretty much covered, the computers and the plexiglass are pretty much covered.
We can always
Yeah.
verify with her.
She had other PPE,
Well, yeah, I
expenses,
just,
other stuff for cleaning and
True.
sanitizing.
And, you know, we've already got a surplus fund, or a surplus of the 3.2 and about $300,000. We can always add line items for
Right.
future costs, should the need arise. Because again, we
So
have.
the question what, Commissioner Davis was asking, she could come back, later
Yeah.
and ask for, okay.
That's where the reserve is.
Yeah,
built in,
yeah,
but in case
that's
we
what I
would
meant,
have
yeah, okay.
to
And then
need
we could present an amended budget with new line items or stricken line items for the future costs to the commission.
that. The property appraiser just, elect not to meet, or did we
I'm
contact?
not sure. It may have been inadvertent, she may not have been on that email I sent out, so we can double check and see.
Yeah, we need.
But I know
Yeah, I
she's
think
already,
yeah.
I know she's already purchased the laptop and plexiglass. All of that was already submitted, so Lee's already got the receipt for all of that. So, all of that I know has been purchased as of
Maybe
now.
we need to reach out and make sure we don't have any incurred. if we need to.
And we can bring that back too and let y'all know when y'all need to have that separate meeting to talk about the business grants and stuff like that. We can even let you know then if something's
I think the
being
same
added.
thing for the road department, needs to be
Yes, sir.
addressed.
But again, the incurred costs for both of those, very small.
Yeah,
Risk.
yeah, very, very.
And also very small risk is what I meant.
Okay, the next actually is the road department, and, we see it's $3,401.
And that's everything that's been submitted up to this point. And Joan's been continuously submitting invoices as they get stuff.
One thing I did want to, now that we're kind of talking about, future changes, is one thing we recommended within the plan was, approving for the board to approve the, city manager to make amendments and future changes to expense line items. So, like, should we meet with the property appraiser and she comes down and says, hey, I had to buy some more PPE and it cost me $2,000, can this be included in the plan? Instead of having to convene another special committee meeting, Ms. Sherilyn could make that determination and we could include it within the line item. So that's something for the board to think about.
Moving,
We did road department already.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll
I think we're-
find my road.
Need to make sure that, we stay on part of any objective road department that may pop up. The next is the sheriff's department,
Yes, sir.
and, we're looking at, they've got $200 incurred, and then the.
$2,000.
$2,000, excuse me. I told y'all this was small print. And then the $153,500 for projected. They, of pulled back, they had talked about the air handler system.
Yes, sir.
They could not guarantee that that construction would be done by December 30th. That was their concern, that it would not be completed.
They did, however, find, and I guess this would go the same route. Now, while they're not currently expended, it's definitely a higher priority. Something like this, the wiring of the shelter or the wiring of the senior center, big construction costs such as those are very time sensitive given the hard deadline that work must be completed. So we definitely want to think about bumping those up the list, getting those started as quickly as possible. So that's just something for the board to think about. But yeah, the $150,000 is for their minimalized project where they're going to have 6 to 7 negative pressure cells where they can keep COVID positive inmates or quarantine people when they bring them into the jail.
Moving forward, our next page would be the supervisor of elections, census.
Yes, sir. I mean, all of it is labor and PPE, labor and hazard pay, all of it's higher due to COVID. Everything can be tied back there, so it doesn't strike any real risk problems for me for his incurred costs. And then as far as his future costs, I mean, it's gonna, again, this is probably gonna be, future one will probably be a line items that will change given, what's available and what he can do as far as running the election. One of the biggest things that he talked about is doing some drive-through voting to maintain social distancing, keep it outside, and the equipment associated with that. We gave our best estimates for how that was included, but again, there are estimates. The supervisor gave us as much as he could at the current moment, but I would assume, given that it's election season, very up in the air, I would assume that those numbers may fluctuate. But again, that's only in the future costs.
But now the funding is fluid, but it would be a reasonably.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Allowable.
I mean, everything he's asking for is the ability to facilitate outdoor elections effectively to maintain social distancing.
I have a question. You hit on it a little bit with the sheriff. Look at the sheriff. They had $150,000 in future costs that would be time sensitive. Look at somebody else before that. They had $300,000 that's time sensitive. That's future costs. This party has $26,000 here. That's time sensitive. That is future costs. And you know what's going to happen in November. When will we know something about the 75%?
Unfortunately,
because right now, I mean, they can approve these. I won't have the money to pay it. You know what I'm saying?
No, I completely understand.
I mean, I need to know something pretty quick about it. That other 75%.
And
so I know how we're going to float this until then. Or...
But understand, once we approve this plan, it's submitted to the state, and then that would provide an avenue for them to release the additional funds, right?
Hopeful. I think the strategy, though, if you know is that the supervisor election is going to have the money before November, and you don't know that the state's going to release it by November, you would authorize the clerk to pay these future costs when incurred from the present money that we have. So in other words, you block out another 27 or something thousand out of that existing money. But when that's incurred, that can be paid out of that. Otherwise, you may not be able to meet those expenses election because you may not get the money from the state.
As far as some of our calls with FDEM, I know some of the larger counties, they're having some problems getting some of their funds. So you're starting to see a real push for this.
To release the money. Yeah.
And specifically, not even just, so larger counties, yes, they have a little bit more weight to throw around, but I know one of the biggest topics has been financially constrained counties because some of the larger counties have, rainy day funds or slush funds or just plain old budget surpluses that they can utilize and be okay with getting paid back a year from now. But financially constrained counties, that's not an option. So I know all of our people have been in contact and, like Lee said, everyone's pushing for this because everyone is wanting to spend. It's at the current moment, it's almost like a carrot being dangled you know, here's $3 million, but we're only gonna give you $800,000 because we don't trust you to spend it, correctly up front. But, you know, we can't do anything with it if they don't release some of that funding, at least in a periodic. Another strategy that talked about, and this could help alleviate, Mr. Washington's issues, was possibly giving, for the larger projects that some of the people, so your courthouse renovations, or the jail renovations, or your, shelter renovations, creating a separate request to DEM and asking them to allot just as much as it would cost for that project to allow us to give our contractors the go-ahead to start the project to ensure completion by 12/30. And that is a strategy we had talked about, and, you know, definitely something we can at least try. Because at this point, with how DEM's running it and how the Treasury Department's running it, I mean, it's just, it's trial and error. We gotta see what works and what will get them to release the money the best. That's also something to think about.
Well, we're hopes that we will present them with this plan, and even if they don't give the full 75%, at least they'll give another 25% waive, and
Yeah.
That's,
But it needs to move fast, because, you know.
Sure.
But as far as supervisor elections, he didn't really bring us anything. The only thing that was a little concerning was his ask for the counter for the mail-in ballots. But I know several other counties have also requested those, so we feel comfortable enough justifying that as with the increased volume in mail-in voting due to coronavirus, that it presents, you know, an undoable task on his limited staff to count those by hand, and that the secure counting. And again, this would all go in the justification memo, but it's a little bit higher risk. I don't know that I would put it all the way up to like a 2, like a moderate risk. But it is, out of all of his asks, the most risky, but I do feel good because other counties are asking for the same equipment. Tax collector is the same situation as the road department and the property appraiser. We hadn't heard anything, as far as if they might have potential future costs.
Wait a minute, before we leave the supervisor, though, that 26.4, you're gonna pay here like in the next year regardless. What they wanna do is go ahead and allocate some of that an additional 26.4 of that 810 to that money, and authorize the clerk to pay those expenses out of that 810 when incurred. Because you're gonna pay that in the next 30 days, irregardless, right? Because you gotta have it before the November election. So I think that if you don't wanna float that money in your general fund, the way to do that is you're gonna have to designate a piece of that of the money we've already have to pay for that. That's what y'all want to do.
We do that by consensus, or do we?
Yeah, I think we can, like we do everything else. But so, and just so everybody's understanding, I think where we are now is we've got is it 810 that we've already got in cash?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're reserving their fees, which is the 264 figure. Now you're reserving another 26.4 for the supervisor of election. So now we're down to 500 and something out of that 810. Does that make sense?
Well, a while ago, he said our 810,604 we already got, but based on these calculations, we're at 1.3 something.
103. So
103.
Yeah. But that's all incurred. I think what Mr. Reeves is saying is just prioritizing the stuff that is either going to be already incurred or is a big ask that's going to be coming up that it might be advantageous for the county to just go ahead and pay from their coronavirus CARES Act funding that you already received, and not wait for reimbursement and float it out of your general fund and have to deal with moving the monies around that you might be advantageous for the county to just go ahead and that bill from allocation of the CARES Act. That makes sense.
There's kind of two things here. There's already incurred and future incurred. There's money we got and money we're gonna get. Hope to get, right? So already, and you probably don't want to get those mixed too much. Already incurred, for instance, is money that's already been paid out, right? But we're not, the money we've got, we're reserving some of that for things that are going to be in the future, such as their fees, such as y'all are talking about the supervisor of election. right? So the money we've already got now, you drop that down to about 500,000 to pay, and that's perfectly reasonable. I'm not saying don't do it that way, but I am saying no, understand what we're doing here. We've got two different things. There's the money incurred for future, and then money we've got versus money we hope to get. And so when you've got something like the supervisor of election, that's gonna be paid irregardless. It's gonna be paid. We might as well put that out of the money we got, and we're not risking it.
Understand. We just have, but I guess what you're saying, we gotta also remember that reduces our pot of money
Yes,
each time that we allocate reserve money out.
Exactly.
So we have to just be cautious, we don't overstep our funds.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Does that, agree with everyone to add the $26,400 for the drive-through voting as a reserve item?
If I could have, Billy,
It's already in there.
you got, you got a number of where we at now? I mean, as far as.
I'm figuring that right
That's why
now,
I
trying to
thought
figure out
that's what I
exactly where
thought
we
you were
are.
doing.
It's already in the incurred expense.
Is that mistakenly where it says already previously incurred on the supervisor?
You're talking about the counter, the central counter for mail-in ballots.
We put that in the incurred similar situation, not quite as far as long as the ambulance, but basically there in the sense that, like Mr. Reeves said, it needs, if he's gonna have it, it needs to be ordered like now. Yeah, so that's why we went ahead and put that in the incurred cost.
Talking about the drive-through voting. Talking about the central counter for the mail-in ballots or for the drive-through voting? I think we skipped.
Tommy mentioned when you go to 27.
Yeah, we jumped around a little bit.
The 26.4 is what we're doing, future incurred.
I don't wanna jump in too much here. You've got a total figure, $111,655.44. I think what you're intended to do is to pay that entire figure out of the present dollars that you have,
That was my
whether it's been
understanding.
incurred or not incurred. If that makes sense, is that?
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
was my
so
understanding.
the 26.4 in the future costs, just moving those, for all intents and purposes, into incurred costs to ensure that it's covered through an election season. So we're not waiting on money for stuff that he needs to have by middle of October at the latest.
That was my understanding.
All right, is everyone good with supervisor?
Yeah.
Tax collector is, again, low risk, and it's a similar situation. We're more than happy if they want to meet with us later on down the road, for any possible future costs, more than happy to do so. And that is it for the county.
I think maybe and this is my concern, is that we're gonna get pages mixed up and everything. I think if you just go through the things in order and approve them, I think you can at the end say, now of that money that we have, we want the county's items paid first, and then move on to the rest until that's exhausted. I would really just keep going right through these pages and let's knock them out.
So we start back at the top.
So the next one will be junior college.
Well, do we need to go back to the top?
We gotta go back to the top of the building first.
However, we won't get confused. That's the point.
Well.
I'm just gonna put
And
it
if
on.
Clerk, how will we not get confused?
However y'all wanna do it.
Start back at the first page.
Start at the top.
Okay.
And we can go past the county when we get
We're going to go back to ability first now.
Okay.
Okay, Ability First, we spoke with them, yesterday or the day before. So what they've been doing is installing, with people being at home, people who might normally be in a situation where they'd be in a nursing home, are staying at home because of some of the stuff that's been happening in nursing homes, not only in our state, but in others. They feel like they might be safer within their own home. In order to do so, they need some accessibility ramps to get into their home and out of their home, to make appointments, to go places, grocery shop, that kind of thing. So what they've told me is they've already built 5 within Madison County for Madison County residents, and they would like to build 6 additional. Again, this is kind of, I would say it is a moderate risk. However, when I spoke with, the representative from Mobility First, she let me know that Leon County approved, work for them within Leon County. And then, Mr. Reeves, this is something we'll definitely have to talk about regarding their sub-grant agreement, is ensuring that the funds are spent within Madison County, because, what she told me is the sub-grant agreement they signed with Leon for their CARES Act that allowed them to do projects of this nature within Leon County was, there was a stipulation that all money spent, allocated from Madison County must be spent back into Madison County. So they can't take any allocation that, the board gives them and use it within Jefferson or Liberty or anything like that, because they cover the entirety of the Big Bend. So between those two factors, it is a little bit higher risk. What does give me comfort is that Leon approved it, as far as the mobility ramp, the actual work. And, I think as long as we have the proper language, and correct me if I'm wrong, as long as we have the proper language within the sub-grant agreement, I think the county should have a limited exposure.
And of course, they understand they would only be able to get funds for work completed by the deadline.
Yes, sir. Yeah, they said, I told her that, and she said that they operate on such a volunteer status that, they have teams basically ready to go. The $2,000 estimate per ramp, is her high-end estimate, because all that they're paying for are the materials, and then they hire one general contractor who runs a team of volunteers, to assist within the completion. She said they could have it done in a couple weeks, since there's only 5 or 6.
And what was the rating you two?
Roughly 2. I mean, you feel pretty good about it, given that you know other counties are approving it. As long as we put the proper protections in place, I think we'll be all right.
Board, what do you think?
And of course, they would have stipulation there that, I know the attorney said something a while ago, we couldn't force them to pay us back, but there was an agreement there if it's challenged that they're responsible for.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That's a relatively small amount of money that would help people. Help people that really need the
I
help.
think for the needy people that it helps, I think definitely go with.
What you guys think?
Go with.
Approve it?
Yeah.
Next is, ARC.
Yes, sir. I mean, there's really nothing egregious, that they're asking for. As far as their incurred costs, it's mostly all labor. She did provide, a breakdown of their labor summary, and it shows explicitly how all this is tied to COVID, whether that be paid for forced closures, whether that be, pay for self-quarantine or testing, or pay for overtime hours. So everything is being able to be shown to, tie back to COVID-related, and therefore should be allowable. PPE, again, that's self-explanatory. And then as far as all of her asks, they're all very reasonable. And this holds true for every single stakeholder. For future costs, if we did not have an exact dollar amount, an invoice or something, or an official quote, we did use the high end of the estimate. So in all reality, when future costs shake out, more and more should be available to be open to allocate by the board.
Low risk then.
Effectively, yes, sir.
Let's say the board.
Okay,
I would approve.
Okay. The next coming up is the City of Madison.
I guess the only thing I would say, I mean, it's such a minuscule amount of money. I haven't seen anyone ask for headphones before. They did pay for those. I don't think she sent it to us. If it works, it works. I see how it's tied back specifically to be utilized for go-to meetings. So that's the only thing that jumps out at me is like having me have a second thought. But I think it's a reasonable amount. I mean, as far as everything they're asking for, it's telework capabilities, it's lift station rentals, which in the frequently asked questions by the Treasury Department, anything sewage or sanitation based is allowable because the increase of utilization from everyone being at home all the time will put strains on the county. I mean, it's stuff that we don't necessarily think about, but it's definitely a cause from everyone being shelter in place. They hired a janitor, similar to how the county hired some people because they lost inmate labor. That's low risk because that wasn't budgeted. Everything they're asking for is perfectly fine. The only thing I might say, we did provide the high-end estimate for thermometers, backpack foggers, and hand sanitizer stations. I know within our special committee meeting, it had been identified that the city might not need all 10 backpack foggers and thermometers. Again, we told them to ask for the high end, and then we can whittle it down from there. So this isn't like the city trying to be greedy or anything. It's just identifying where the monies are best allocated.
Give it a low risk.
Yeah, there's nothing on there that jumps out to me really.
Okay, let's go with it.
Okay, the next is, City of Madison Fire Department.
I did have one question, and it's not, I'm not taking on the city of Madison, but I've been thinking about this the whole time, because you said something earlier about maybe not having a lot of backup on something. When these people are submitting that pay, are you getting, what are you guys getting?
So for, some of the incurred costs, telling us, and that's when we have the estimates if we haven't gotten any kind of receipt or invoice. But what we will eventually need, from any cost that is incurred, or any cost associated with this whatsoever, we're going to need, if it's any labor related, we're going to need timesheets, we're going to need rates of pay, we're going to need proofs of payment, probably labor policies as well for cities and for any kind of county agency.
But how do you distinguish between whether or not it's something that was budgeted or not?
That is more or less going to be decided based on, like, for instance, the city has pay codes built into their system when COVID started, saying this work was for COVID, and if they're working on something that's COVID related, obviously that's not in the budget because we didn't see that it was going to be.
Right.
So as long as we can show effect, or if it's overtime that they would have not normally had, or they had to hire a person they would have never hired had somebody not gotten sick or something like that.
And not assuming the city's doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
we're doing the same thing. We have people when it's COVID, it's labeled that way. It's kind of a question for the benefit of other people who are putting in.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to
Payroll.
that will be more or less a case-by-case basis, and we can identify if they submit our initial documentation. One of the things we do specifically with like PA funding and then also stuff like this is if we have a kind of a gray area question like you're arising or alluding to, we would have whoever the signatory authority of that stakeholder would be, so whoever signed that sub-grant agreement, give us a letter on letterhead stating this person worked this amount of hours on this task, and here you go.
Okay.
Because some people just don't, I don't know as far as like some of the smaller stakeholders or smaller municipalities might not have the capabilities as far as, I know the town of Lee submitted those paper timesheets. So we'll work with any of the stakeholders to make sure that we have all the documentation we need.
All right.
Good question. Moving along to City of Madison Fire Department.
I mean, he sent us a memo, relatively small. They want a couple backpack foggers and sanitizer stations for the firehouse. I mean, I don't see any risk, and this is a future cost. City Madison PD, we all there?
Yes.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I would like to back up on the fire department.
Yes, sir.
So they didn't have any previously incurred costs for overtime or anything like that, COVID
No, sir.
related?
He said specifically because, I don't know, I know firefighters had some other grants as well, and on top of that, he said that because Madison City Fire Department doesn't really engage with inpatient transfer, that there wasn't a whole lot that they had to do, regarding, work, for specifically tied to COVID. So that's why all he was asking for was minimal PPE.
Yeah, with the Madison PD.
Right, Madison PD, everything, the only one that might be higher risk, but I think we can sell it based on the, how we, it's hot in Florida, was the 33739 was supplies for the officers who are running OT for the testing sites. Effectively, it was a cooler, ice, water, Gatorade, stuff like that. Officers and nurses working outside, providing refreshments to ensure that people aren't overheating. I know the health department told us a lot of their nurses were on the verge, wearing all the PPE and being out in Madison County in the summertime, they were on the verge of, detrimental effects from heat. So I think that's how we can sell that. That would be the only thing that I would say is a little bit higher risk. The OT obviously is fine, because that was not budgeted. And hand sanitizer stations for the police station itself, I mean, that's self-explanatory. As far as the big thing are the new computers, and this would definitely be it too. The sell from the police chief was, he's requiring all of his officers to sanitize their cars when they get in, when they get out, anytime they interact with a member of the public or go home, go in somewhere else. His current computers cannot be sanitized with any of the effective disinfectant sprays or liquids or anything like that because it would fry up the computers. So he has found computers that are waterproof enough to be able to be sprayed with backpack foggers or to be able to be wiped down with Clorox wipes, things like that. He has found those computers to outfit his department. It would cost about $24,000 on that. So that would be the slightly higher risk, but again, I think there is a justification within there. But again, all of these maybes, there is risk. There is risk involved, and as Mr. Reeves alluded to, none of this is risk. And then, go ahead.
I was gonna say, did he explain the patrol car sanitation?
Oh, sorry.
I was just wondering why the unit was clean.
It's for each car. It's an in-car sanitation unit. It's basically like a UV light that can either screw in or it will be like a suction to the window. Again, we overestimated to allow for any kind of room. I think he said they have 16 or 17, so we bumped it up to 20 for
$25 each.
$500. Oh. No, I would guess maybe 10 vehicles.
Okay. When we met with them, they had told us 16, and we advised them to bump it up to 20 to ensure that we're not under budgeting things, that we're over budgeting, and then we can eventually move that down when things are purchased. And then the generator, again, this is a little bit higher risk, but I think it's pretty good. Their current generator will only power the lights, and it does not have enough kilowatts to power the air circulation. So when his officers are required, if the power were to go out, his officers are required to be in the police station, the air's dead. So that allows the virus to be just sitting stagnant within the air, and that is presenting his officers into an unsafe work condition. So the proposal for, again, this is a rough estimate on the generator, is to get a generator in there big enough that can power the AC unit should the power go out, keep the air circulating.
Because one concern I have with these different generators, can we make sure that they're compatible with one another? If they have to be
So that could be something we look at when we actually go into ordering and whatnot. I think this was more gonna be a permanent generator situation, an installed generator, not necessarily a portable, since it's going in the police station and it's reasonably necessary. But again, that could be something that the committee or, Madison PD or whoever is gonna end up making the final call on which model is purchased. We'll definitely make sure that that's a consideration.
I guess another concern would be the availability.
Yes, sir.
And
By 12:30.
installed in the
And that's gonna be the biggest thing that we're gonna run into with all these line items, realistically. What we can hope for is that eventually the Treasury Department will realize, that it's just physically impossible.
because if all the counties around, even state of Florida, putting in generators, I mean, that's gonna be
All 50 states got CARES Act funding.
yeah, that's why, if we're just looking at one state, that's gonna be.
The supply chain issues. So I did see in the most recent frequently asked questions from the Treasury Department, they are starting to bring up things about supply chain issues. So hopefully, best case scenario, they will allow for time extensions or something similar. However, we just don't know. We have no idea at this point.
Yeah, we don't want to run into a situation like it was when this first came out with shortages of sanitizers and masks and all that kind of stuff.
And I think inevitably we have to plan that we will run into that. And I know, at least for delivery where it's not installed, one of the line items we'll go over here in a little bit, we already went over for EMS with their, in their future costs, or not EMS, emergency management, in their future costs was, a trailer and a cooling station. The vendor on that trailer and cooling station for the drive-through testing stated that payment is not due until 10 days after receipt from that specific vendor. So that ensures if it were to come January 20th and there's no time extension that has been authorized by the Treasury Department, y'all can just send it back. No harm, no foul there.
So, Mr. Shepherd, or in the process of doing that, or would the order date have any impact or on that piece of equipment?
Sir, at the current time, the order date does not. I think that gives you a good foot to stand on, should you try to contest that later on down the road. However, at the current language of the legislation states that everything must be delivered in hand, all services rendered by that December 30 day.
Okay, thanks.
At this time, we're going to take a little break, guys. I've got 10 o'clock, we're going to take a 10-minute.
Before we get up, approve the one that says City of Madison PD, that sheet.
Yes.
Okay, and so by my count, that's the last sheet before we started the county.
Right.
And so then we've done the county.
We'll start at North
And
Florida.
College.
We'll start back on North Florida.
I got mine all in order.
We're gonna take a 10-minute break.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'll call this meeting back to order, and at this time, we will be moving into North Florida College.
Yes, sir. Okay, this was relatively straightforward. Again, they got most of their stuff covered through separate fundings. All they're asking for, their big ticket item is, this is an amalgamation, and they have the itemized list, and we can provide that to the board should you like to see it. But it's the abilities for their employees to work from home should the need arise. It's laptops, it's MiFis. The one caveat with that is within this, he gave us how many, there's two of the things are subscription-based. So we ensured that the college knew that the payment from us, or from the county rather, could not pay for subscription that goes past December 3rd. So they're aware of that. That's factored into the $32,000. And yeah, but I mean, all of this I'd say relatively low rate. It's laptops, MiFis.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out that, just confirm with the attorney that, my relationship with the college, this has no effect on my ability to participate in any of this.
No, sir, it doesn't. You would only have a voting conflict if something were going to your special private game, and none of this would go to your special private game. So I don't think there's a conflict.
Clarify that for the record.
Let us be safe and sorry. All right. Moving on to the school board.
Yes, sir. So we're looking at, again, they never got back to us with hard figures as far as what they've already paid, but we estimate between postage, materials, all that, they sent a letter to every kid or every family within the district. So again, that's the high end, but we estimate about $2 per piece of postage when you're factoring in the actual postage plus the materials. And then signage, about $1,000. It's just signs, one-way walkways, mask required, that type of deal. So those are all low risk. We just haven't heard back from the school board regarding concrete, how much they spent on it. Everything they're asking for, I mean, it's really not anything egregious at all. It's all relatively low risk. Foggers, the masks to wear with the foggers, mobile hand washing stations so they can bring them into cafeterias, gymnasiums, things like that might not already have them. Disinfectant wands or the UV wands. We budgeted that at one per every other class. So the school board estimated about 200 individual classrooms within the school board or within the county. So 100 wands there. Water bottles, those are just reusable water bottles since all the water fountains are shut off. And that's something we've seen other counties do again, so I feel pretty good about that. Wall monitor temperature checks. This would be something that they put onto the wall, and the students could go walk up as they're walking into the entrance and the exits of some of the larger schools. Walk in, walk out. They walk up to it. It checks their temperature, make sure they're not running a fever. And this stops you from having to have so many school board employees sitting there with the manual temperature checkers, especially for the busier schools. Handheld thermometers, just a surplus of those. These 16 are specifically going to be allocated between the middle and high school. There are 8 individual sports clubs, like after school, that they identified, and this is 2 per group. So the football team will get an additional 2 handheld thermometers. The girls volleyball team will get 2 additional handheld thermometers. And then outside seating, to maintain social distancing, they would like to request some like park benches or outside seating, specifically the weatherproof stuff, the metal benches and tables that have the rubberized coating, your standard school fare stuff, to put those out into some courtyards or some outside patio seating areas. That way when they're feeding kids, they can maintain social distancing. One thing that is not on this budget, because we understand it's a huge ask and it will factor out how much actually gets utilized by small business, but it's something for the board to keep in the back of their mind. If there is any additional funding and the board sees fit, one thing that they wanted us to bring up, not necessarily put on a line item, is that they could use additional busing, or additional buses to maintain compliance with social distancing better than they're going to be able to. Because he said, I think in a perfect world, he would get about 4 more buses. So that's just something to keep in mind. We haven't priced that out because as of right now, there's not the room, and even he put that at the bottom of the list because he realized how big of an ask that is. But it's something for the board to keep in mind.
Availability would be an issue as well.
Exactly. Because I'm sure a lot of other school boards are thinking the same thing. All right, does anyone have any questions regarding the school board? All right, senior center. Initially, she had submitted some incurred costs to us, but then realized that her current grant funding is going to cover it. So we backed all that out. Basically, the PPE, thermometer, fogger, and UV wands, those are easy. Those don't really present too much risk to the county. The movie screen and the outdoor seating and the pavilion are bigger asks. Again, the pavilion, I just took a super rough estimate on a large size pavilion. If, that is a line item that the commissioners would like us to move forward with, we can, speak directly with the senior center, find out how big a size is, and see if we can find a contractor who can install one in time. And then even so, with all those, then we could get a more complete figure. I went with a very high-end figure for a storm-proof, like extra large pavilion with a metal roof, figuring that will have the least amount of maintenance costs. But again, you can get pavilions, depending on how big you want, all the way down to, $20,000. So that could reduce and be put into allowable funds for other things quite a bit. I would say that's of moderate risk, not necessarily lower, along with the movie screen and the outdoor seating. Basically, we're going to try to, should the board want us to go forward with it, the pavilion and the outdoor seating would kind of go congruently, saying, we need the outdoor seating for, to remain social distancing while we're feeding our seniors. And we can't expose already needy seniors to additional, elements such as rain, heat, wind. So the pavilion would be a catch-all rather than getting all the individual umbrellas. That might be hard for the seniors to operate, and the center doesn't have enough staff to go around and do that, on a whim. A more permanent solution for that, for outdoor seating. So those kind of go congruently. I would, again, put those at a more of a moderate risk. I could see how somebody could try to poke some holes in it. We feel pretty good about it, but it's all going to be about our justification memos. And then the movie screen, again, I'd say moderate risk. What the idea behind that is, they used to show the movies within the senior center themselves. However, due to social distancing, that's not really possible. So what she was asking was getting a movie screen. That's an outside movie screen. So one of the inflatable ones that she would put on the side of the building, and either have the residents drive up in their cars or spread chairs out, like foldable chairs, outside to maintain distancing, especially as the weather starts to cool down a little bit. She thought that might be nice.
On the pavilion, isn't there something in there about not having permanent structures?
Yes, there is about permanent structures, but if we can kind of sell it more or less as and again, this is why I'm putting on there as a moderate risk, and selling it as part of with the outdoor seating. What they're saying, what we're interpreting the permanent structure to be is more or less, we're not going to build a building. We're not going to build a new shelter. We're not going to build a new testing center. We can retrofit things. Because the pavilion would be an add-on to the senior center as itself, and it goes in part with the outside seating, that's why we chose to at least put it in as a line item for consideration. Again, it is, as Mr. Washington points out, relatively higher risk. I wouldn't put it all the way at like a 3, we're very concerned about it, but it would definitely be something that we would have to work on a justification and make that ironclad to sell.
the only reason I ask is because like Mr. Reed said earlier, you get an agreement with them, and something goes wrong, they have to pay it back. And senior citizens, I mean, I'm not knocking them. I don't believe they have the $100,000 to pay it back, you know what I mean? And I don't want to put them in that position.
Oh, of course not.
You know what I mean, at the same time. So I'm
And-
just giving y'all that to think about.
Good point.
Very good point.
And it would be, especially, it would be, open, because they might not even want to risk it when it's $100,000. But if we get a contractor who says he can do an appropriate sized one for $20,000, maybe that would be a risk that they'd be willing to take.
$20,000.
Y'all know how tight it is down there, that's what I'm saying.
They can't pay it back.
So you did say that they got some other funds from grants, but we were concerned about them because of their homebound meals and Meals on Wheels type.
That's why she backed out all the meal costs.
Good.
So we no longer have any of the line items for meal costs. It's only for sanitation, things, and we, you know, with all the stakeholders we met with, we ensured that, the funding streams were separate. On some of the, like the school board, for instance, and the college, we had them send us all their agreements to ensure that federal tracking number for the disbursement of funds was different, so that way we could show that they were different federal funds paying different things.
I don't know that, like, the pavilion, if we'd be doing them a favor, putting them into that risk factor, because they're very tight, very
Exactly.
tight on
Right.
funds.
And
I'm a little leery about doing them. I know, of course, the seniors are at the higher risk level as far as COVID. That kind of dealing points there, but I'm really concerned about tying them into something because their budget is extremely limited.
of course. And, you know, that's the consideration. We said we'd bring it up. And again, that $100,000 mark, that is the absolute top end of how much an outdoor pavilion could cost. Realistically, that's gonna come down. We didn't have a chance to meet with the senior center again. After she emailed us and let us know that the meals were actually gonna be covered by her current funding, she said one thing that she would ask for consideration on was a pavilion. We workshopped it at our last committee meeting and thought the way to sell it would be the cover to protect the seniors from being in the elements while they're outside eating because of COVID, and that's how it's all tied back. And I think you can sell it as an addition to a building, not necessarily a new permanent structure, because it's within their grounds, and it's providing a direct, you know, improvement for the outside seating for the seniors. But again, I completely understand the risk associated with that.
I just know that, as much as we want to help the seniors, and that's a high priority, I'm just afraid that we are hoodwinking them to something that they, if it,
It'll come back to us.
Yeah, I don't want to put them in a box that they can't crawl out of.
Of course.
Can we just take that out?
Yeah, for us, yeah.
Let's just take that out.
Yeah, I think we'd be safe with taking it out.
I think we, the pavilion and the movie screen.
Would they still be able to do the outside seating without the pavilion?
We can definitely look into that. I mean, I don't see why not. Maybe an umbrella situation would just be a higher per unit cost of the seating. But we can definitely look at different options for that. And we'll get with the senior center and find out what would work for them.
I'm questioning on the seniors, the outside seating without the shelter, we are in a pretty temperate area here for, climate. And, I just don't know.
Well, we are getting closer to fall, but still hot out there.
Well, then it'd go cold.
Yeah, that's right.
My thing almost would be to remove the outside seating as well. That's just my thought.
But then you run into the social distancing problem.
Yeah, the whole idea behind the outside seating ask is, right now, they're having to tell more of their seniors that they can't come in to maintain the social distancing.
Right.
And making them eat at home. This would allow them to return more closely back to their normal operations and provide the social interaction that these seniors so desperately crave.
How many of them would want to come in and
Sit outside.
sit outside?
That's my thought.
Well, yeah, that's what they told they gotta sit outside, they said, I'll stay home.
That was my consideration,
Yeah,
just knowing,
Instead of totally eliminate it, why not just reduce it?
So that is another option. We can work, over the next, from now until the next meeting, we can work directly with the senior center and see if we can't find exact quotes and get an exact number for outside seating, and if the board would like that for consideration, instead of striking it completely.
Okay, I think I would like to reevaluate that.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, are you striking it today and they're gonna bring you back more numbers? and
Yes.
You may add it back?
Yes.
So you're striking the seating and
The movie screen, the outdoor seating in the pavilion, and then they can bring it back up at a future date.
All right, anything else on the senior center?
Yes, sir. We'll be moving to Town of Greenville.
We will go to Greenville. All right, incurred, meter readers, we already talked a little bit, and so we'll circle back to the town manager to date. Meter readers, previously how they had, captured the utilities costs was handwritten. That handwritten paper was passed to a clerk manually inputted it into a system. It was changing a lot of hands. That opens people up to exposure and cross-contamination. The meter readers are electronic, utility meter readers. Scan it in, it automatically uploads to a system, so I can scan it in if I'm the guys working the utility trucks. It goes automatically to the clerks in the town office. They can see it on the website. They can, they have all the situations with that. I mean, it makes sense. It's less interaction and less chance of cross-contamination. Masks, that's self-explanatory, just some PPE. The contract to town manager, like we said, that's relatively high risk. Their justification was they had to hire somebody during this COVID situation, and they hired a CPA as a contracted town manager for the reasoning that they had fears that the town would become insolvent due to loss of revenue and some other things stemming from COVID during this situation.
I don't see how they can tie that to COVID, because they have a town manager.
Mm-hmm.
This almost would be just a replacement, in my opinion.
I'm thumbs down on that one.
It was already budgeted expense.
Yeah, that's when it was just a replacement, if you will.
Understood.
So,
I would go with striking the
On
previously
both,
incurred and the.
yes, that would be my
Yeah,
opinion.
Future cost too.
My question too would be, what's the difference between the tablets for city council, which they have 8, and there's 5 council members, and then laptops for telework?
So the telework is for town employees. They identified 4 people who would need the ability to work remotely, i.e. to make sure that now to go working congruent with the new electronic meter reader system for utilities, they can now work from home. People who would have had to been previously on the network, and some other town employees who can do their job effectively from home if they had the equipment to do so. The 8 tablets for city council town council is for their town council meetings to move remotely. It was for the 5 council members, their city attorney, their city manager, and then one other person, public works department, because they're all required to be present at their town hall meeting or city hall meeting. That's why they're asking for 8. The meter reader, why it's again down here, they need another one to more they had bought, this was the setup in buying 2. I think it was like $1,200 to set up the system, and then each of the 2 that they have was $1,500, if I'm remembering correctly. And so when they buy the new ones, it's just the cost of the actual physical device, and they're asking for one additional one of theirs. The auto temperature check, that's just like we talked about with the school. That's for their town offices because they have a lot of people come in to pay their bills. so that way they can get checked for temperature before they walk in. The payment kiosk, that is to eliminate, again, the cross-contamination of me handing you cash. What it is it would be set up within the town hall or wherever the utilities are paid, and people could come and deposit cash or deposit a check into a kiosk, like an ATM type deal. All they would need to do is type in their account number, and that way, and it would print them a receipt so they have proof of payment. That way they're not handing checks or cash and having to interact with the town employees on like a face-to-face handing things. The telework software obviously goes with the ability to work remotely, but yeah, that's about everything they have there.
Any of those others you just mentioned are moderate?
I mean, so I would probably say the payment kiosk is moderate, but we've heard of rumblings, people talking about those before, and I think it's a pretty good sell. Because as the town manager alluded to, they have a very, very high percentage, so maybe what we would need to do is find out what the actual percentage, as far as our justification, what the actual percentage of residents pay their bills in person, but they have an abnormally high percentage of people paying their bills in person comparatively to normal towns I know, or not normal towns, excuse me, bigger towns. I apologize. Larger towns where a lot of people, I know, being from Tallahassee, I pay my utility bill online. I have an app on my phone. In Greenville, the town manager explained to us, the people walk down the street and go pay. So that enhances their ability to maintain the way that they've been paying their bills and maintain it safely.
They very easily evaded tonight.
That's what he was saying. And he said even more so, it was probably, at least 60 or 70% cash.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're just striking at this point, just the town manager to date and the town manager through 12/30. Any other questions on town agreement?
I'm good with it.
All right, last one. Town lead. The town building safety upgrades, that's plexiglass. We have receipts for it. That's low risk. Incurred labor costs due to COVID. Again, those are paper timesheets, so we might have to have a justification from somebody with signatory authority at Lee. But again, that was all for COVID-related things. So that's, again, good. Their asks, pretty straightforward. Telework capabilities for 10 employees. It was a very similar situation.
All those council members
and then council members required attendees to council meetings, and then I think a total of 3 city employees who could effectively do their job from home. So that counted up to 10. And we could look at that too, as far as she was going to talk to the council members whether they would prefer laptops or tablets, and that's going to change the cost member. Oh, if the council member wanted tablets, that might bring the cost down by a couple thousand, because tablets can be $500 when a laptop's $1,000.
Right.
So that will all be once we get the specifics. But that was utilizing $1,500 per person with anything that they might need telework. If they might need to get a MiFi or something like that to allow them to have those capabilities. We wanted a big buffer zone that ultimately might end up being a smaller number. And then a fogger. That's it.
Any questions? I think one thing we may need to do now is, as we've gone through and instruct some things, to make sure where we're at money-wise, if we're going to set a meeting up next week, maybe have the clerk come back and give us an updated figure, so we'll know exactly where we're at.
If I could recommend, Mr. Chairman, I think let's get the clerk to do a dispersal sheet and to give that whole 810 and how it's going to be dispersed.
Absolutely.
And give that to y'all so that y'all can approve that, and if y'all want to change it or whatever, you can do it, but you'll be looking at those figures all at one time at one place. And that's where you'd show the future expense for the supervisor's office and those sorts of things. And what the clerk may have to do is bring you a couple of alternatives that y'all can choose through.
Maybe when you build it, when you put it together, get some alternatives, but I would like us to reach out to the ones that haven't give us any future wish list, so to speak, and just to make sure so we're covering our bases. Any more questions at this point? I guess then we need to look at setting a meeting for next week.
I think, Mr. Chairman, you need to approve
Oh.
the plan, with from my count, it was 2 deletions, the deletions to the senior citizens and the deletions to the town of Greenville.
Yeah.
And so approve it with those deletions.
Okay, you've heard the attorney's recommendation. Do I have a motion to approve as discussed? And motion made by Commissioner Kelly, second by Commissioner Martin. We will do that. Any discussion?
And one other thing, on the Madison County EMS, we have to flip those 2 numbers. You remember one?
Yes,
The
The ambulance.
previously incurred and
Right.
prevalent, so that was another change. I think those 3 are the only changes I saw.
Okay. Any more discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Good, that fails, carries 5-0. What I'd like to do is set a meeting up next week, that would be to everyone's, agreeable time. I think we had looked at maybe Thursday was better for most everyone on the board.
You got a conflict there?
What time Thursday is good for everyone? That'll be on the 17th.
8:30? A little better.
Okay.
Yeah, sooner the better.
At this time, we will set our special meeting for the 17th at 8:30 a.m. And that's agreeable.
Yeah,
with you?
Richard can be there.
That time, Billy will come back and give us some proposals and disbursements, so we will have a more itemized, item. Any more to come before the board at this time?
I was just gonna ask, Billy, when you handed these out earlier, did you want to talk about that any, or just for
Yeah, that was just the information from last night's meeting. I was just, if you have questions, call me. But I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but.
Also, at next week's meeting, we will also add to the agenda, the attorney has told us that he's been in correspondence with Gulf Power, and they've hammered out all of the details as far as the easement goes by the interstate, and that will be on the agenda next week to
Next Thursday.
next Thursday as well. Yes, it will be on the agenda, so we will hopefully, if we can agree to that, and everybody can move forward on that.
Post it out there wherever we have to post it.
Sure.
If I may,
Yes,
one
sir.
last thing, to keep in consideration, let's keep thinking about, and one thing we definitely want to address at our next meeting is the plan to move forward with small business assistance and possibly individual assistance. So keep remembering that that's going to be basically the catch-all of what we use with our non-allocated, or not our non-allocated funds, but the funds that we have not approved line items on or have not presented line items to, what's left of that 3-2, and start working on a plan to get those applications in process and get the word out to the community.
So part of that, of course, would be what the application is
Mm-hmm.
and what they'll need
And what we can
And the
do,
requirements.
Eligibility requirements.
Eligibility.
and what we can do is we have, we can work on giving you a shell of an application that has a couple different options for some eligibility criteria, like, you know, how long they've been in business in Madison County, how much money they make, per year, how many employees they have, and, you know, the committee can set that where you all see fit and where it will benefit the community the most. And then several other different options, so that way we all can get on the same page and we can do what the committee decides.
Could you, prior to next week's meeting, forward that to Ms. Pickles, and then she can
Yes,
send
sir.
it out to us, so we'll give us time to look
Review it.
over it and
Yes, sir.
review it.
I would think, as far as numbers, wouldn't say 50 cover just every business in the county as far as it's considered small? I mean, then you start getting up like Tri-County and this there.
Sure.
I would think 50, 75 would be a gracious plenty.
Maybe there's some other counties that's already got some
Yeah.
templates out there.
Oh, yeah, so that,
Small counties.
yeah, so we are working down in Lafayette, and I know they are working with getting their application approved. So we've been in constant communication with the team that's down there because we know we're very similar size and very similar in need. It's basically gonna boil down to what the, board wants to do as far as how long the businesses have been in business within Madison County, and how many employees and how much money. I think they gave their board 3 or 4 different options, and we can obviously present you all with the same thing. And then there are some other interesting possibilities for the small business assistance that we talked about at our last committee meeting, and we will present that to the board as well.
Well, to the commissioner's comment, you know, I don't know if you're considering, like, if Nestle's even in that.
Well,
Let's say have a separate group, and you got Mr. Reagan's, you got
Oh, yeah.
J&J, you got.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like,
Reagan's
Reagan's
you got
has got
several, Stallmeyer,
Yeah,
you got several that may.
that's true.
be in that.
Yeah, you may have to say 100 at least, because, well, Reagan's owns 8 businesses out there, 8 different businesses.
I think it's one for each
Yeah.
business on that.
Well, it could be each business, or even if you collectively said Reagan's Enterprises, that's probably under 100.
Well, I think that's the main thing, is if Dan would, forward some of the templates in the other counties, small counties around to Sherilyn, and then she can get it out to us, to give us time to look over it, so when we come back next week, we will have, some forethought into it.
Mr. Chair, I have one question. What about civic organizations? Are they eligible for any of this funding?
Could you provide me with an example?
Farm share?
So farm share, I know we had spoke about in our initial committee meeting. There is a lot of other grant funding and a lot of other funding streams, that could present a conflict of interest or a double dipping issue. So we had thought of kind of staying away from that and sticking specifically within private business. However, we can look and see if there's any kind of workaround, or if anyone else is doing, if you have specific organizations in mind, we can look at it at a case-by-case basis and just kind of evaluate if there is any possibility for assistance. But I would say as a general rule, it would be probably much more effective to focus on privately owned small business within the county, aside from, situations like farm share.
Attorney Reeves had a comment.
One thing, just so everybody's on the same page, y'all have approved the plan, but the clerk's gonna bring you back a dispersal schedule. So if people start calling in and saying, hey, y'all approved the plan, where's my money? I think what y'all are telling us is that, you're gonna approve a dispersal plan before we actually start cutting checks.
Yeah.
So that's what we're gonna tell people is that, y'all approve that dispersal plan, and then after next meeting is when you would, the money can be dispersed.
That's correct.
When would we, once this is all said and done, I'm assuming we're gonna be reaching out to the state to request and release of additional money. I mean, that's got to be done, like last month. Is all this is contingent upon them releasing the money. You know how long it took to get to 25%?
Yeah.
For small counties.
Yeah.
Took months to get it, when all the other larger counties had already gotten it. Got their direct, allocation. So I'm very concerned about timeline on getting the state to release additional funds. I'm assuming this plan is one of those requirements that they're requiring us to have.
So my understanding at the current moment, they don't really have, other than strictly reimbursement, basis, they don't have a real plan in set, and that's what we're waiting on the guidance for. They released a 25%, because effectively, there's no guarantee that, we can document 25%. We've shown that we can allocate all 25% that Madison County was dispersed. There's no, written guarantee that says, if we show this to DEM that we've spent the 25%, that they're gonna release the additional 75 or 25, whatever the percentage may be. We're just trying to get, as many advantages in our corner as we can. So that was the real push on the 25%, was to show, you know, we have these expenses, they've been expended, we have proof, release some more money. We're waiting on guidance. A lot of the other counties, like Lee mentioned, are, you know, pushing for guidance because DEM hasn't released anything other than a straight reimbursement basis. And we've been pushing very hard for small financially constrained counties because I think they're the ones who can't utilize the money unless DEM releases it up front.
Right.
So unfortunately, that's still very much up in the air, and in forces that are not in our control, our best bet is to try to, you know, put as much weight in our corner as we can, and hope that up there at the Capitol that they're working on the best plan to move forward and start releasing some of this money.
One question, Chair. Did I understand you say earlier, someone, or maybe I even read it, that an audit would be something automatic, or?
No, not necessarily. We just want to make sure that the county is prepared, and that we do our due diligence to make sure that the county is expending these funds in a legal manner, and that we are completely above board and above any kind of audit threshold. Because, you know, who knows when you're going to get an audit. I don't know if you will, regarding CARES Act funding. There's nothing been that I'm aware of that says there's an automatic audit necessary. However, I mean, I would assume it's relatively likely. I don't know that Madison County themselves get an audit, but that audits will come from this CARES Act, because I anticipate that a lot of people, you know, especially counties who might want to just get gung-ho with spending it and not a thoughtful process such as Madison County is doing, might make mistakes along the way. So we're really, I would anticipate there will be a lot of audits down the road for CARES Act. I can't say that Madison will for sure, but what I can say is we will do everything in our power to make sure Madison County is prepared for an audit and can pass an audit.
One more thing I'm gonna ask, and we talked about doing an agreement with each one of these, recipients. Will we have that ready?
Yeah, for next week, yes, sir.
I do, a lot of y'all know I sit on the board of directors for the Small County Coalition. I'm gonna reach out to Chris today and see, I'm sure they have already had this involved with Small County Coalition. Because like you say, there's a lot of other coastal Spring counties, there's basically, pretty flood of them, and I'm sure they've already put some pressure in. I'm gonna see what's been done. I'm gonna call in today.
As we begin to get closer, does anybody have another question for Dan? Attorney, do you have anything as we close?
Thank y'all.
Thank you very much.
Tom, do you have anything?
No, sir.
Dilly, any more? Commissioner comments? Mr. Kelly, Martin? And I have none. We will meet again on the 17th at 8:30. Motion adjourned.
Stand up.